Welcome to another edition of One More Light with me, Val Kleinhans, where we chat and try to break the stigma when it comes to mental health. We keep the conversation about it going. Today, we've got Taylor Pinkston in the building. I am so excited because she is the founder and creator of The Heart Advocate. She's a self-love therapist and activist who is dedicated to spreading the message of self-love and how to choose it as a coping skill when it comes to your mental health and healing. We want to know all about this. We want to know everything. So Taylor, thank you for being here.
Absolutely, Val. Thank you for having me.
I'm really excited to learn so much today because we all could use some self-love, but
Yeah.
everybody sort of has their own definition of what self-love is. How do you define it?
I define self-love as a choice first, to take the time to get to know self, to accept self, to treat self kind of the way that we treat the people that we love and care about, to be very intentional with the choices that we make and then reflecting that value, that worth. So I see self love as a reflection of the worth that we place on our lives. And yes, it comes out in choices. It comes out in how we think about ourselves, the way we speak about ourselves. Um, there's no one definition for self-love. I don't think it's a one-liner kind of word. It's very vast. It's very, there's a lot of depth to the word. But the love that you give to others, giving that to yourself is probably the most condensed it could possibly get. It is a practice, so there's work involved. In the self-love world that I come from, it's called heart work. So the work of the heart. And I was certified through the path of self-love school. So I practice, teach, preach self-love based on the path of self-love, and the founder, Christina Rylo, who I owe everything I know about self-love to.
Okay, so it's been a learning process for you too, just like it is for
Yeah.
the rest of us. She's like, you already know.
Yes. 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 And
Yeah.
ongoing.
Well, that's the thing. I think the work truly never stops. The heart work, though, I'm interested in that as well. Okay, talk a little bit more about what heart work is.
So we like to see self-love as a tree. You can use the tree behind me, um, as a kind of a guide. The roots of the tree are self-worth. The tree is the self-love tree, and then there are branches to that tree. And so how we practice self-love are 10 aspects or branches, if you like the tree metaphor. And so, there's, just to give you a few ways to self-love, self-care. That's the popular one. Everybody's talking about self-care. But there's also self-empowerment and self-respect and honor, and self-expression, self-trust, self-esteem, self-compassion, self-acceptance, and awareness and honesty. And so there's tons of ways to self-love, but we need them all. And what I've learned through my own certification in self-love and, just experiencing it now that I have the awareness of what it means, there there's a tendency to, have certain branches that are really strong and then other branches that are not even really considered, because most of us do not know that these are the ways to self-love.
Right.
And then getting more specific, what does self-acceptance look like for you, Val? What does it look like for me? It's different. I can't tell you what you need, but I can kind of guide you. And that's what I do. I guide people to themselves.
Beautiful. So why the focus on self-love? What was going on in your life that made you sit down and say, I need to prioritize this and I would love to show other people how to do it too?
I got my master's in social work at what is now called Penn West, California. It was Cal U here in PA.
I
When
know
I was,
that. I grew
but
up in Pittsburgh. I lived,
okay, so
yeah. I had plenty of
Yes.
friends that went to Cal U. I lived there until I was 22. And this is not an easy city to do this kind of work in. It's a tough city. Like,
Well, I didn't have it then. I didn't have it then. But I got into social work basically because I took some electives and needed to graduate and fell in love with it. So I decided to get my master's in it. And, you know, right before I was about to graduate, I found out I was pregnant with my daughter. And I was just, you know, there's a lot of reflection that goes into that moment. And that's what was happening for me. A lot of reflecting over my choices over the last 8 years in college, and how a lot of it was those choices were rooted in making other people comfortable, other people happy, other people, you know, um, changing to kind of fit into what other people wanted, especially in romantic relationships and intimate relationships. And so I just knew that I didn't want my daughter to make those same choices. And although I don't have full control over what happens over her life, I just knew that it started with me. Mm-hmm. And self-love was like a really buzzy word back in 2012, 2011, 2010. But again, nobody could really tell me what it meant. Right. And, through toxic relationships, through, dealing with verbal abuse and alcoholism and, all of the trying things that came with that at that time, I just knew that I needed to be the reflection of self-love that I wanted her to possess. So I knew it started with me, and that's how I found the path of self-love school, through like a Google search. I'm like, what is self-love? Because social media wasn't giving it for me. It wasn't telling me what I needed to know. So yeah, I mean, ultimately my daughter, I always say she was like the catalyst to the Heart Advocate, and why I decided to go to the path of self-love school and get certified. But you have to practice self-love in order to teach it.
Yeah. Do you think her watching you do the work now impacts her in any way?
I know it does. I know it
so?
does. I mean, kids, no child asks to be born.
Right.
No child asks to be born. And when you're born, you immediately are learning. So whatever that environment, whatever the language is in that environment, the tone, the energy, all of it, that is what your kid is soaking in. I didn't want her to soak in self-hate. I didn't want her to soak in negative self-talk, and no, it was an absolutely not for me. And so I know through seeing her, she's 7 now, but just hearing her process her own mental health and hearing her process navigating relationships as a second grader, and just watching how she speaks to herself when she makes a mistake, or the outcome of a choice isn't what she wanted to be, and just how she's able to speak kindly to herself, even if it's after she is mean to herself. I feel like she's watched me do that. She I'm fighting against a society that is rooted in like perfectionism and body shaming and beauty standards and colorism and racism. I'm fighting against all of that and trying to help her know that she's good enough. So I know that I have to believe that for myself and behave and speak about myself in that way. So yeah, I absolutely see the impacts.
Yeah, and that's a beautiful thing. I feel you're proving that what I've always thought, which is self-love is sort of a muscle that you have to work on. And it's not something that comes easily, because there is so much coming at us constantly. I mean, regardless, I think everybody gets bullied or picked on for something, as stupid as it is. We all have stories, and unfortunately it continues into adulthood as well. I've always struggled with like trying to find my own self-love in the middle of all of that.
Mhm.
What were some of your maybe general tips for that somebody could use to help themselves find their own self-love in the middle of all that cloudy crap?
Yeah. Declutter your social media.
Mm,
Most of us, most of us are on social media, even if we're not entrepreneurs or influencers. We're soaking in that energy and that information on a daily basis. I had to get very rigid with who I followed,
yeah.
you know. And that's a great place to start. Follow the mental health advocates like ourselves. Follow the people who are different than you. Follow people who are, doing the work to self-love, who are strengthening self-worth. We're out here. Follow the therapists and the counselors and get in the support groups. Another one I would say would be to pay attention to how you speak about yourself.
Mm,
That's a very foundational practice that I help anyone that I'm working with, whether it's in individual sessions or workshops. What's coming out of here?
hmm
Because I can't stop you from thinking it, but you can stop you from saying it. You can speak to yourself in a way that maybe your body, your heart is not used to hearing you speak to yourself. So that muscle that you're talking about, you're absolutely right. It is. I have been practicing self-love since 2016.
mm,
And I still engage in negative self-talk.
yeah.
I still struggle with boundaries. I still struggle with self-care because I change. We change. The world changes. Our needs change. So my biggest tip is check in with yourself.
hmm
Spend quality time with yourself, asking yourself, how do I feel? What do I need today? What's going on with me? Like, you check in with your friends. You're like, how are you? How you feeling? What's going on in your life? Do that in your quiet spaces because you're changing.
Right. Become your own best friend, so to
Yeah.
speak. It's almost, I mean, it sounds
Yeah.
easy, but it is hard to do when you do have all of that coming at you and you're just inundated with it. But
Yeah.
it's so important to
Mhm.
prioritize it. I mean, and I wasn't able to do this until I started practicing mindfulness and at least
Mhm.
becoming aware of the negative thoughts that were coming into my mind, or at least being aware of like my shoulders tensing up because I was getting upset about something,
Mhm.
some sort of situation, and I would, or you're at work, right, and you get an email
Yeah.
and you're like, oh, she is trying me today. You're like,
Uh-huh.
I don't want to. Ooh, Carol in HR, no, but she's trying
Yes.
me. But I'm like, oh,
Exactly.
like I'm feeling this in my heart and I'm feeling this in my
Mhm.
shoulders. I'm like, wait a minute, don't write back anything. Just
Yeah.
sit there. Don't write
Yeah.
it a response just yet. Just sit there, let ride
Yes.
the wave, and then
Yes. Feel your feelings, feel your emotions, process them. They're not in control. You are.
yeah.
And react in a helpful way. I always say, was that a self-love choice?
Mm, good
Because
question.
a self-love choice doesn't mean the freedom to do whatever, whenever, the freedom to be petty, the
Mm,
freedom to engage in toxic, neglectful to others, not considering other people's thoughts, feelings, and be. That's not what it means. And I know that there's a lot of messaging, and you Google self love, it'll say vanity,
yeah.
and it'll say conceit, and it'll say selfish. Um, we could redefine those terms, sure, but the reality is self love is about a mindfulness, not just about you, but about how you take up space.
Mm, right.
So I don't disrespect my friends in order to respect myself. I let them know a boundary to to respect myself. That's different than just disregarding people.
Yeah.
You know,
One's aggressive and one isn't.
Yeah. Yeah. It's more mindful. It's more thought through.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Tell me about the Heart Advocate because it sounds like a beautiful thing from what I was reading.
So the Heart Advocate has become so many things. It started um, in 2017 as Ladyhood Journey because I wanted to ultimately create a safe space for like the college kid,
Mm,
for like the why and reason I started, the work in the first place. And it grew into this all inclusive, everybody needs it, doesn't matter your age, gender, race, you need self-love. Um, and it is a individual self-love session space. It is a, in-person virtual workshop space. It is a blog. It is a free virtual support group. It is me doing presentations and workshops speaking about self-love everywhere I go. It's a social media presence and showing what self-love in my life looks like.
yeah.
Um, it's this therapeutic, it's me merging the mental health space and the self-love world. I always consider myself like the bridge because I do have this social work background, and I am going to become a clinical social worker, and I do cognitive behavioral therapy at Healthy Start. So I am doing the clinical work, but I'm also very holistic, and I think self-love is very holistic. So
Yes.
there's not a lot of overlap with those worlds, and I like to bring them together. So I see self-love as a coping skill for mental health and for healing, which is also lifelong. Um, but it started as a blog. Started
That's
as a
how it
blog.
always starts. I love it.
Me just sharing my story and my truth and giving support and encouragement and advice. And, now I'm doing individual sessions and, speaking and workshops, which workshops are my favorite. They're my
Yeah.
favorite.
Why do you think that they're your favorite thing?
Well, typically they're more intimate, but they're group. It's group work. So everybody's vibing off of each other, sharing their stories. It taps into that self-awareness and honesty, which is the first step in anything, but it's definitely the first step in self-love. You're hearing other people share, it makes you want to share and be honest about what's going on in your life. If you can call yourself out, you're ready for self-love. Not just highlighting all the amazing things about you. Let's talk about the things that are hard to love about you.
Mm,
That's where self-love begins. It begins in the trenches. It begins when you're curled up in the fetal position crying. Like it begins, with heartbreak and letdown and self-neglect. And that is where my cohorts, that's where we all started with this, saying no more, no more letting myself down.
yeah. Yeah, because it can tear apart your mental health really, really quickly when you're constantly throwing negative thoughts at yourself or even letting negative words out your mouth. Like it's just it can be a lot. I love the idea of, self-love being a coping mechanism and holistic tool to use
Mhm.
to better improve your mental health.
Yeah,
Do
yeah, yeah.
let's expand on that a little bit. When did you realize that the two went hand in hand?
When I started well, I was basically doing clinical work and my self-love certification training around the same time.
Mm,
So it was like I'm getting all this training here for work, for cognitive behavioral therapy, and I'm working with like the, Judith Beck and the Beck Institute and doing all of this. And it sounds so similar. There's a
mm,
lot of conversation around self-esteem in the clinical space for
mm.
individuals. And there's so and there were, coping skills and recovery. Um, but it kind of stops there.
Yeah.
And there's so many other ways to strengthen the self-worth, which is ultimately the goal. I want to strengthen the roots of my tree. And it was just like, why don't these go together? Why don't these go together?
Yeah.
Because strengthening my mental health is not just going to require me being confident in myself. I also need to trust myself in order to be confident in my choices. If I don't trust myself, I can have all the confidence in myself in the world, never do anything.
Yeah.
If I have self empowerment, then I'm not actually taking action. And then you could be confident and still be speaking to yourself as if you're not good enough. The imposter syndrome sets in. The most confident people have imposter syndrome.
Beyonce
You,
does. I saw the documentary. Like, yeah.
you can have all these degrees and spend all this time training, and still feel like, am I worthy to sit at that table? Yes. And
Yeah.
so that's where the self-worth work comes in, which is what self-love is. It's the strengthening of your self-value.
Yeah. I had to tell you, I asked that same question when I went through like my own outpatient therapy for just
Yeah.
a bad suicidal ideation, depression, anxiety. I was working on
Mhm.
all of it. And in this group therapy, they sort of presented us multiple coping mechanisms and kind of said, pick which one you like. But, they did everything
Mhm.
from recreational type activities, from yoga to Tai Chi to sticking with a planner and what they called social rhythm therapy. And then there was talk therapy, of course, as well. But they never, and maybe it was because it was in a group setting, but they never really drilled down into how much of how you feel about yourself is harming your own mental health and the way you feel about yourself and the way you treat yourself. They never asked that question. And when I just remember sitting in those sessions thinking, okay, I get that maybe we're kind of keeping this general because it is a group setting, but all of us are here because we're feeling a type of way, and that is rooted within ourselves.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
There's something going on inside each of us as individuals that's telling us, we're not worthy, or we're struggling for whatever reason. So
Mhm.
it's nice to see that the work you're doing, is taking that on and
I'm always,
head on.
yeah, I'm always thinking about how do you value you, and how does that show up in your thoughts, your words, your feelings, and your behaviors. Like, how does it show up?
Mm-hmm.
Because our expression, our language, our communication, it'll tell all.
Yeah.
It'll tell all. It'll tell how you value you, how you see yourself. But again, you didn't ask to be here.
Yeah.
Nobody asked. You learned how to love you by whatever you were surrounded with from the moment you were born.
Yeah.
And we know that the media plays a major role in how we see ourselves.
Yeah.
And that perfectionism is rampant.
It is. Classism, racism. It doesn't even have to be. I mean, it can obviously be what's going on at home, but even external materials can
Yeah,
infiltrate that. I mean, that was something, it, it doesn't matter how much privilege you have or don't have, anybody can be affected by that. But it's
we are all affected by it. We are.
all affected by that. I mean,
Yeah.
it's especially harder, when you don't come from a home that really shows that, I would think, because you have no foundation whatsoever. But and
It,
then you
it,
get to, it
yeah,
just becomes this like ball of confusion. If you come
yeah.
from a home where you're not really seeing that's not really happening in your environment, then you're going out into the real world where it's almost even worse in some cases. Oh, that's a lot to
Yeah.
untangle. That's a lot to tackle. So in those really, really tough cases, what's your best advice? What are your thoughts on navigating that?
There's a lot of there's for me personally, when I'm thinking about those who don't fit into the standard, the those who don't fit into the binary,
Mm-hmm.
you know um that is why I offer free self-love support and spaces,
Mm-hmm.
because the access to the information is the biggest hindrance to the practice.
Yeah.
If I know that I deserve self-love, And like you said, if I didn't see it and the media is telling me that I don't deserve it and I'm not good enough and I'm broken and need to be fixed,
Double whammy.
I'll never, there's never, it's always pre-contemplation. It's never happening, you know? So once, for me, it's about reaching those spaces, those intersections and communities that have never even thought of self-love.
Mm.
But that not everybody can afford a self-love session
Yeah.
with me. And so my blog, my virtual support group, these are spaces where I'm doing things for free to give the information. So advice that I would give to those is to know that, number one, you didn't ask to be here. And just because someone made you believe that you're not good enough for whatever reason does not necessarily mean that it's true. Even if it feels true, does not mean that it is. It is a lot of clapback against what we've been taught. I am challenging what I've been taught, not just in my household, but in my community and in the media every single day.
Mm-hmm.
And so you will never fit into the standard, and that's a great thing. You're already off to a great start. You don't fit. That's great. Don't try to fit, because trying to fit means conform.
Mm-hmm.
That means dimming your light. That means self-neglect. That's perfection. All of these hateful spaces are the opposite of self-love.
Yeah. We don't have time for that.
No,
No.
no.
That started to see, I mean, I went through that too, where I started to realize, the opinion of one person means real little in a sea of 7 million that are on this planet. Just because you're one person does not feel you does not mean that you're not worthy of the love of however many else are out there.
Yeah.
You will find your own tribe, I'll call it. You will find your own group of people, and it's possible. I hope to encourage people the absolute same way. So what's next for you? What are you looking forward to when it comes to the work you're doing?
Well, I'm finishing my self-love or my self-care series. I'm starting a series that I'm going to be repeating as an ongoing process called the self-care workshop series. So this is the first round of it, and this Sunday I'm finalizing it with a social self-care and boundaries workshop. So I'm really excited about that. I'm always looking to collaborate and be in spaces that don't traditionally talk about this stuff. I love the spaces that are super corporate and don't value self-care. Invite me. Workers matter. And yeah, just for me, it's a constant trying to connect with folks and bring the value of self-love to the individual, which ultimately helps the group, which ultimately helps the community, which ultimately helps the world, in my opinion. So yeah, if anyone wants to collaborate, and whether it's a workshop, presentation, or individual sessions, I'm always looking to connect.
Yeah. And hopefully we start to demand better and then see better. And it just continually gets better from there. I'm absolutely here for it. Taylor, I so appreciate your time. I so appreciate everything you shared with us. Thank you so much for being with me.
Thank you, Val. Thanks for having me.